Hi, Christina. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
So I understand that you work with law school applicants. You're helping them with the application, the personal statement. What advice do you give them?
Well, I give them a lot of advice. It depends what they ask. So I think that the questions I get most about are a few things, right? Timing, what kind of content to use with the law school application process in terms of essays, especially the personal statement, and then things like who should write my letters of recommendation, which school should I apply to? So, it runs the whole gamut.
Okay, great. And when it comes to personal statements, what are some common issues that you run into that you help students overcome?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And I think that one thing that applicants suffer from is they've already applied to college. So they have in mind this idea of what it is to write a statement. And so in some ways that college essay is helpful because it should be a personal statement, unlike applying, say, to a PhD program where the focus is very much on the academic chronology. The personal statement is still personal, but it's dissimilar from the college essay in that it needs to be a lot more focused. So, for example, one thing that a lot of applicants don't realize is they need to present a really clear connection to their reasons and their interests and their preparedness to go to law school. One example might be, someone has a background in chemistry and she's worked in research for a few years, and then she learns from a personal friend about patent law and she realizes, oh, that would be a much better path for me. So that's a story that needs to be told in the personal statement, because without it, a law school admissions committee is looking at a transcript full of biology and chemistry and wondering why this person's applying to law school.
Right. So you want to show a clear logical progression as to why law school would be the next step in your journey.
That's right. And that said, it does not need to be and shouldn't be a blow-by-blow of your whole life. It's usually a 2-page statement. And so we don't need every single thing you've done. And we definitely don't need the hackneyed, my parents always said I should apply to law school because I love to debate. I mean, mine did too, but it's pretty overused. So tell your story and make it personal. I remember when I wrote mine and I was a senior in college and I didn't have any advice. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did feel really strongly about my personal story and why I wanted to go to law school. And I remember showing it to a couple close friends, and each of them kind of looked at me and said, "Oh, Christina, that's kind of personal. I mean, shouldn't it be a little more formal?" And I thought, "Oh no, I've got it right then," because it did show who I was. I remember sitting on a panel once, and there was a dean of admissions from a law school, and she said, "If I'm sitting at my desk before a cocktail reception and I have a stack of files in front of me and I'm reading through each one, I would want to be able to go out into that reception later and know, oh, that's Jamal, that's Rashida, that's Jeff." Those statements make sense in terms of who the person is.
Right. So the applicant should really stand out and be unique. And obviously someone has a chemistry background, took a lot of science classes, that's already going to be somewhat unique for law school. But what about the people who are majoring in political science or pre-law or English, where for some of them, law school might be an afterthought, or it might have been always something in the back of their mind, but they weren't sure it was for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first of all, it's definitely not something you need to tell the law school admissions committee that it's an afterthought, right? You need to present a clear case. You're applying to be a lawyer, essentially, right? So you should be able to make a good case for yourself. And you need to think about what your reasons are. And first of all, if you don't have any good reasons, maybe you shouldn't be applying to law school. I certainly tell people that sometimes. Law school is not a panacea to all your problems. It might be the opening to them, in fact. So, think about your reasons. And your reasons don't have to be because you've worked for a judge and been a paralegal and also, had an internship at the International Criminal Court. You don't have to have specific experience, but you do need to understand why you're going. So perhaps you were an English major and you've also done some social justice organizing work, and you're really interested in the criminal justice reform that Krasner's doing in Philadelphia. You can talk about that. You don't have to have some kind of long-term experience in it, but you do need to have an interest and understand enough about yourself to be able to make the case for yourself to a law school.
Right. Those are some very valuable insights. really communicating clearly. And you brought up the idea of an extracurricular activity potentially being relevant. Now, boiling all that down into the personal statement, you said 2 pages. Now, I know everyone's always thinking, oh, can I play with the margins, the font size, the spacing? We get more specific? What exactly should the word count be? What should the spacing be like, and the margins on the edges?
Well, the first rule is follow the instructions. Perhaps someday you'll be a litigator and you'll have to follow a judge's orders about how long a brief can be. So you need to, I've known, committees who say they won't even read an application if it doesn't fall within the specification. So unlike the college essay, it's not about word count, but it's usually length. So a school will say maximum 2 pages, or up to 4 pages, but we prefer 2. I think 2 is pretty much the standard. And some schools will allow longer, but I caution that because, this has been attributed to lots of people, right? But I sat down to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long letter. You should be able to, ruthlessly edit your statement into something very strong and have it be within 2 pages. Can you wiggle with margins and font size a bit? I suppose. I really wouldn't go any smaller than 11 point. People on these committees aren't usually 20. I've heard that it can be hard to see things that are too small. So, be reasonable. I wouldn't tinker too much with margins or font size. And by the way, if everyone is in a pretty standard format and yours isn't, it does definitely stand out.
Yeah, that's the next thing I was thinking, is that if someone's looking at hundreds of these in a day and suddenly there's one that's way too small or hard to read, you're going to know something's up.
Yeah, they're going to know. So, be cautious with that.
What about things like addenda? How long should a typical addendum be? I know that's kind of broad, but maybe we can narrow it to, let's say, an addendum related to a low LSAT score.
Sure. I think I would say for any addendum, I'd make it pretty short, because the purpose of the addendum is to explain something. And I like to use it. I like to not use the personal statement for that. There might be some huge catastrophic thing in your life that matters and affects things, and you might need to talk about it in terms of how it relates to your interest in law. But if that thing or some other thing relates to, say, low grades or a low LSAT score or something else that needs to be discussed, for example, stopping out of school for a mental or physical health problem, the purpose of it is just to explain. So let's say you had a health problem. Let's say you had a mental health problem. That's not a shameful thing, and it's a fairly common thing. You took a year off from school. So explain it. I would say explain only what is relevant, and that is not that much. So perhaps, I had a health problem. I took these dates off from school. I came back in good standing, and I took care of the problem. It's in the past, and I have been in good standing since. I really don't think it's any school's business, and they don't really want to know all the ins and outs of things. If it's something like a low grades, think about your reasons. Did you have low grades because you were pledging your sorority and weren't paying much attention? It's not a great reason. But what you can do is simply say, my grades were low this one semester. I rectified the problem. You can see all my other semesters I had high grades. So this was an anomalous instance, right? So don't excuse bad behavior, but you can at least put it in context.
Right. And that sounds very matter of fact and straightforward to the point.
Yeah, I would keep it pretty short.
What about, are there certain cases where someone should not write an addendum? I get the sense that applicants typically want to over-explain, and maybe they want to write an addendum just because the LSAT didn't go well, but there was no clear reason, and they're just trying to explain it away when maybe the answer is simply retake.
Yeah, and it's exactly what I was going to say. You work in the LSAT business, and so I think that's a very common thing. Someone will say, well, my LSAT's low, and I'll say, well, maybe we should wait to apply until you can retake it, study and retake it, because it is such a determinative factor. So, I guess, if you have a low LSAT because you have tremendous test anxiety and you've diligently worked, you could talk about it, but I would say the LSAT is probably my least favorite thing to have an applicant write an addendum about, because, it can be addressed by action.
Yeah, as opposed to, let's say, a GPA, which is already set in stone, or at least most applicants are towards the end of undergrad.
That's right. That's right.
How do you think about the LSAT versus the GPA in the admission process overall?
Well, I can't speak for any one particular school. And of course, each admissions committee is handling things its own way. But I think of them as fairly equally weighted, or in other words, equally important. I think of the application as like a pie chart, right? And about a third is your grades and the kinds of courses you took to some degree, although I have to say law schools care more about the absolute number on the grades than maybe some other schools, right? Who are more interested in your major and the courses you took. And then another third for the LSAT. And then the other third is all the other things put together, right? So the letters of recommendation and your essays and any other relevant factors, experience.
Okay, yeah, great. Speaking of letters of recommendation, what advice do you have for applicants around that, about professors versus employers or other people out there, like a random friend of a friend who's a senator or something like that?
Right. And gosh, that random friend of a friend who's a senator is the question I probably get the most.
Yeah.
And it's such an easy way for me to say no. Because listen, unless it's Barack Obama, who, I'm not buddies, but if I were, I might have him write me a letter of recommendation. It's really the person who knows you and can speak to your academic ability. I think sometimes applicants jump right over law school when they're thinking about it and head right to their career, and they're forgetting that they're applying to an academic institution. And that institution's first goal, before it makes you a lawyer, is to have you be a successful student. And so it really wants to know if you can perform in the classroom. And so for many candidates, some schools require 2 letters be academic or strongly encourages that. Other schools are a little more relaxed, but I think that the academic letters actually carry the most weight for many schools, especially the more prestigious schools. Of course, if you've been out of school for a very long time, it may not be feasible or even possible. And the people who can speak to your abilities may be your employers. So of course, you have to use your judgment on that one. But I think many people forget about the academic side and how important it is. So I always look first for the really strong academic recommendations. And on that, again, like someone might say, oh, well, I know the chair of the department. And I say, yes, but does she know you? It's the professor from whom you took classes, even if she's an associate professor or an assistant professor, even, it doesn't matter. It's the professor who knows your work and understands your ability and can speak to you personally.
That makes a lot of sense. The personal connection, of course, would be the most compelling, I would think. But let's say an applicant, they're towards the end of college, but they're not going to apply to law school for a few years. And they're worried that the professor might not remember them by that point because it's let's say it's 3 to 5 years later. Would you have any advice for someone in terms of maintaining a connection with the professor or some sort of prep to supply them with appropriate materials to write a letter?
Yeah, I mean, letters need to be fresh, so you can't just procure letters now. I think that would be a little strange. But what you can do is say, hey, Professor X, I'm planning to apply to law school in a couple of years. I'd be so grateful if you could write me a positive letter of recommendation. And then the professor would say, oh, yes, I'd be thrilled. Or maybe you should ask someone else, right? In whatever polite way to decline. So I think it's definitely worth having that conversation. And if you've had that, then, you just stay in touch. It's not that hard to stay in touch. I went to college a long time ago, so it was a little different then, but, with social media and social networking platforms and, old-fashioned email, I think it's not too hard to be in touch with someone once or twice a year just to keep that relationship alive. And then, on that sort of refresher thing, I always encourage applicants, even if it's just been a few months, to say, hey, Professor X, I took this class with you. I did this project with you. I really enjoyed learning this. I'm applying to law school, right? Jog his or her memory, because of course that professor is teaching dozens or maybe hundreds of students a year. So even if it's a recent professor, you definitely help him or her out.
Yeah, I love that idea. Just even like once or twice a year to stay on their radar in some way. I could imagine that translating into, increased familiarity and freshness when it does come time to actually write that letter, even if it's a few years later.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people can be intimidated by keeping in touch with someone, but there's really no reason, right? There's no reason. This is someone who does like you and appreciate you as a student. And so, I mean, I wouldn't bombard him with your Instagram every day, but a little a little relationship can go
Right.
along.
And it's also not the most important professor. It's the one that maybe you have the closer relationship with.
It's not status, it's relationship, because that's the person who can say, this is one of my best students in all the years I've taught, right? Not the one who says, oh, her GPA was this, and I know she wrote a senior thesis. That's not helpful to you at all. And it's the same thing with professional recommendations, right? You don't need the CEO of the company. You need usually your direct supervisor. And it's great to have a friend of a friend of a friend who's a judge, but not really unless you worked for that judge.
Right. Law schools aren't really going to care because they're going to know the person doesn't know you if the letter is somewhat generic.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. And so it's just not helpful. And if it's not helpful, it's hurtful. So don't do it.
Yeah. What about, so let's say we're talking professors, you want to choose a professor, you presumably got a good grade in that class and you're asking them for the letter. But let's say your overall GPA in college wasn't high. Maybe you had a lot of required classes in math or science and you're more of a humanities pre-law kind of person, which I think most applicants are. What do you recommend for someone who just has this low GPA? Do you recommend maybe selecting out the in-major GPA because it looks better? Or is it not worth playing any of those games?
I don't think it's a game to say in your personal statement or even on your resume listing the in-major GPA. I mean, schools are looking at that compiled GPA that they get in the report, but because of that, yes, definitely. I mean, I had a good friend in college who was pre-med, and then later she decided to go to law school. Her grades definitely were not as high as mine, but she, of course, rightly pointed out in her application succinctly and not belaboring the point, but, pointed out that in her courses, a C was an average, whereas in my courses, a C was definitely not an average as a philosophy major.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, we're coming to this point in the year when rankings are going to come out, the US News rankings, they release them every spring. And I'm wondering how you advise applicants around the rankings. Because there's often this trade-off we come down to where you can go to a higher ranked school with less merit aid versus a lower ranked school and get more merit aid. How do you advise applicants in terms of making those trade-offs?
Like every good lawyer, I'm going to answer it depends to almost every question you ask me. It does depend because I think, and again, you have to think about where, I'd say the first question is, where do you plan to practice law? Are you from Ohio and plan to go back there to practice law? It might be better to go to a school in your market, even if you can get into Harvard Law School. I mean, maybe not, right? That's a big differential, but it's the market you want to practice in. And somewhat similarly, like let's say you're not a top student and you want to practice in New York. You're not going to get into Columbia or NYU or maybe even Fordham, but you might be able to get into Cardozo or New York Law School. And you will have an advantage in finding work in New York if you're there. And so, I'm looking at each applicant and where she or he is in the career and in life. And for some people, it's very important to have a name. I mean, this guy's going to head right back to China and needs a particular name on his resume. For somebody else, it's more about the market. For someone else, it's the program. So I would say it's changed a lot over the last 10 years in terms of money. Law school, like every other aspect of the educational market, has become incredibly expensive. And by the same token, aid is offered, or merit aid is offered, I would say, more frequently at many schools than it used to be. And so you have to do your own calculus on that. Are you going to do public interest law and you really, want to be out of debt very quickly, or government work or human rights work? Then you might choose that school that's less expensive. But it really depends on your long-term goals. I went into plenty of debt for my own law school education, but I was able to pay it off rather quickly because I was in, the New York City market, and it was a different time when employability was very high. So that's the other thing that you can't control. You can't control the market you're graduating into. But I think most people are much savvier than they used to be about that, especially after the 2008 crash. In terms of really being aware of the debt they're going into, and the fact that even at a top 20 school, if the market's awful, they may not be able to pay that debt off quickly. So I do see applicants who are much more open-eyed about that than they used to be.
Yeah, it sounds like it's honestly something as simple as doing the research and having a good idea of what you want to be doing and why.
I mean, I would say that for any graduate school application, right? It's a good idea. But listen, it's hard. Many people are applying right from college. I did. I was a senior in college when I was applying, and I did know what I wanted, but I didn't have a precise vision. I think everyone's coming at this from a different place. So please don't take anything I'm saying to mean that you have to have a precise vision of everything you'll do for the rest of your life. Of course not. I mean, there's so much learning and growth that goes on in law school and so many opportunities. So that raw interest, the one internship you did, that's plenty if it's a real, genuine interest and you have the aptitude for it. Don't be turned off by the people who have 10 years of experience in human rights work, right? Both approaches can be just fine.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you still have your JD, you still have career options ahead of you. And if you're not sure exactly what you want to be doing or why, or you are struggling to find a direction to go, and you can always wait a little bit as well.
That's right.
One thing that comes up to mind for me is that if you're not sure exactly what you want to be doing, let's say you're in the winter or spring of application time and you're finding that you're struggling with your why in terms of your personal statement, there's no deadline on this. You can always wait to apply the next cycle, right?
That's right. It's a big commitment you're signing up for. And I mean, the only failure I think of is someone who, no one's a failure, I don't mean that, but applying to law school, starting and then stopping, like that is a big, it's not a great use of your time. So if you're going to go, you want to know that you can commit to it and that it's a good use of your time those 3 years. I am often the person sort of steady in the arc saying, hey, are you sure you want to go? Is this what you really want? Do you know what you want? Or you want it, but you don't have the grades or the GP or the LSAT usually that you want to get into the schools you want. So you really should take it again, study again, because, if you have a goal of getting into a top 10 law school, you know what you need on the numbers. The essays and the recommendations are all actually very important, but they're not going to make up for a huge gap on the numbers.
Right. You can always retake, you can always delay a bit. But when it comes to the law school application timeline in general, is there a certain point in the cycle at which you would recommend someone hold off on this cycle and instead wait to apply the following fall?
I know everyone, it's a big point of chatter and like online chat rooms and such, but I actually see people get into programs very late in the cycle. So of course there is some advantage when you have rolling admissions, get your application in, right? But if it's February and you really want to go and this is the time, I'm also of the mind, go ahead and apply because this is your life. So waiting another year when you know it's what you want, why wait? Because by the way, if you're rejected or waitlisted or whatever, you just reapply again the next year, but why not give it a shot that year?
Yeah, exactly. And there could still be plenty of opportunities and open seats available. I'm hearing even as late as June for just a few months later.
That's right. There's a lot of movement that goes on in the spring and summer, so of waitlists especially. So, right. So if you don't have what you need now, on the one hand, yes, you may want to wait. But if you do, go for it. The only downside is really, I think, not applying when you're ready.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up waitlists actually, because that is something I wanted to ask you about. Do you ever see any kind of waitlist statistics or from your own internal work with clients? What do you see happening in terms of getting off a waitlist, or how often does it happen? When does it happen? Strategies applicants can use? What's your experience there?
Yeah, I like that question. And again, it's something that I was so unaware of when I was doing this so many years ago, but there is a ton of movement and there's a lot you can do. I don't have statistics on that, but from anecdotal experience, I have seen people get off wait lists time and time again. And so as with the personal statement, do follow the instructions. Every school is different. One school might say, you're on the wait list, please, send us an update. Let us know what you're up to. Let us know of any differences in your application. Another school might say, you're on the wait list. Please respond yes or no as to whether you want to remain on. Do not send us anything else. So you really do need to listen to what the school says. Don't send an update if they refuse one. And if they say you may send us an update on March 15th, then do that. So any opportunity you do have, please use it. And if you don't have an update, if you do have an opportunity, but you don't have like an update, you haven't won the Nobel Prize in the previous 3 months, you can definitely express interest. And that's when you do the I love you note, right? you are my favorite school. I would do anything. I have visited. I have done this. I know this person. Call in all the favors. I knew someone who was headed to, I think it was Duke. He was driving from the West, got a call like in August on his way out there and rerouted up to Columbia.
Wow.
Crazy things happen, and I've seen it all the time. So if you've got an opportunity, take the opportunity.
In terms of this wait list or letter of continued interest, I think you were referring to.
Yes.
What you described the script a little bit, but how long should that be?
Well, I suppose it's my legal training, but I would say get in and get out. You don't need to overemphasize a point. So say what you want to say, be clear, be persuasive, but they don't want a 5-page letter from you about why you're interested in the school. Give specific reasons, as with any good writing, right? So let's say it's Yale, and you grew up in Connecticut, and your fiance lives in New Haven, and personal reasons can matter too, right? Showing that you're really interested and really want to go. You have a particular professor from whom you hope to learn. Even if you don't have anything on your side that's more prestigious or more attractive for the application, you can certainly show your own interest, give specific examples, visit the school, don't harass them, but give anything you can that's your own connection and your own interest in the school.
Right. And one thing I'm hearing is that you're saying when it comes to these letters of continued interest, you actually want to demonstrate interest specifically for that school through activities like going and visiting the campus.
Yes, if you can. It's not always possible. Don't bankrupt yourself flying all over the country if you can't afford it. But if you're on the wait list for a school that you really want to get into, I would always encourage a visit if possible.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Christina, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you sharing your advice with everyone. You're at Admit Advantage, right?
I am.
So
I'm the director of law admissions at Admit Advantage.
Great. So tell me a bit about the law school admissions consulting work that you do.
Sure. So I am a Columbia-educated lawyer, and I worked in international commercial litigation for a little more than a decade out of New York and Europe. And then I took this position at Admit Advantage about 5 years ago. And the work we do is with really all kinds of clients all over the world. People come to us with, really every kind of background, Steve, that you've asked me about today. People with low grades, high grades, low GPAs, high GPAs, someone who's got a very strong application and really is trying to reach into the top 10 and wants every bit of guidance she can get, or someone who's more in the middle of the pack and needs guidance about which schools to pick. We give that either working in packages or hourly. We give advice soup to nuts. So from school selection to timing to how to write these essays, how to get the best letters of recommendation, and everything in between. It's actually just a real joy. It's much nicer than working with lawyers, actually.
I can certainly imagine so. All right, well, I'll make sure to include a link to you guys in the video below the description for this video. And what's the best way for folks to reach you? Just through the website?
Just go through the website, www.admitadvantage.com. And yeah, we're always there.
All right, great, Christina. Thanks so much. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Thanks, Steve. Anytime. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Well, that was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it and found it valuable. The folks over at Admit Advantage have made a special offer for everyone watching out there. They're giving you a 10% off discount on any admission consulting package when you use the promo code LSAT Unplugged. So if you found this conversation helpful, you want to work with Christina or anyone else over on the Admit Advantage team, just head on over there, admitadvantage.com, and use the promo code LSAT Unplugged to get 10% off your admission consulting package. Again, thanks for watching. All the best and take care. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.